So I'm here wearing a couple of hats tonight. I'm a student with the Institute, as Sarah's mentioned, and I'm also here to share my personal experience with you as a parent of a baby born too soon. So let's hope the technology works for me. So these are my children, William and Heidi. William on your left, obviously, and Heidi on the right. And so my pathway into honours hasn't been the traditional one. I completed my undergraduate training in health science in 2003, and I went straight into the workforce in public health roles here in South Australia, most recently with the Cancer Council and tobacco control programs. And in 2009 we welcomed William, and then in 2010 our second child, Heidi. So we had them close together. My motivation to start my honours and contribute to research in this area has been largely influenced by the personal experience that we've had with the major theme of preterm birth that the Institute tackles, and what we're all here to talk about and learn about tonight. So in June 2010, our daughter Heidi made a very speedy and sudden entrance to the world in the early hours of a nice cold wintry morning. Heidi was born at just 25 weeks gestation. She weighed 730 grams or 1 pound 10 ounces. She was born just 17 minutes after I presented at Flinders Medical Centre after an evening of just feeling a bit off and an instinct telling me that something wasn't quite right. And after a completely boring and uneventful first pregnancy with our son, nothing prepared us for the shock that we received that night or the ups and downs of what was ahead of us and for Heidi. And as parents, we'd had little exposure to the world of prematurity. We were stunned, emotionally and physically drained, and very concerned for Heidi and the big fight that she had ahead of her. We were required to make very rapid decisions in very chaotic circumstances about our immediate preferences for intervention, and at that point in time we could only really watch and wait to see what the next few days held for her. Heidi was a good weight for her gestation. She was active. She didn't appear to be particularly unwell. She was intubated to keep her breathing along with a range of other interventions to maintain her stability. At 25 weeks, her eyes were still fused closed. Her skin was raw and transparent. She was bruised around her face, as you can see in these photos from delivery. But she was beautiful and she was our baby girl. And as we began the process of familiarisation to the NICU environment, the doctors and nurses, the technology, the equipment, all of the things that were helping Heidi stay alive, the monitors, the alarms, the tubes and the lines, and the rhythm of a world that never sleeps, which I'm sure Michael can attest to as well. So Heidi was about 3 weeks old in these photos, just for those of you in the room who aren't quite sure. So her first few weeks in NICU were exceptional, and she impressed us all with her progress and how stable she was for a baby born so early. And as she stepped down to lower levels of respiratory support, we would spend hours together just like this with her stuffed down my top, attempting to ignore the chaos of NICU and give her the best that I could offer her at the time, given that she was no longer in the womb. So these kangaroo cuddles offered a reprieve from the stress and the strain of an experience that was so far from what we had imagined, and helped to heal the grief of a mother meeting her baby too soon. As we adjusted to NICU life and the shock of her early arrival, we did our best to maintain a positive attitude along with a certain degree of caution the whole time. And ironically, just as we were getting the hang of things, the wheels started to fall off for Heidi, and approximately 5 weeks in, her dream run ended. And I distinctly remember a cuddle with her and seeing things change. A feed that she didn't tolerate particularly well. Her colour changed. She was more lethargic than normal, and her oxygen needs were slowly creeping up. Heidi developed a condition known as a gastrointestinal condition known as necrotizing enterocolitis, or NEC. It's common in preterm infants. And as her condition deteriorated rapidly, she was again intubated, heavily sedated. All her feeds were stopped, and a whole range of other interventions were put in place to try and keep her safe. We were on high alert for the real chance that the condition would perforate her bowel, and in the space of hours things had escalated dramatically. The likelihood that surgical intervention would be required was very high and always in the back of our minds. Initially, Heidi's condition improved and we thought we might have made it through briefly, a lucky escape, but time revealed that wouldn't be the case, and as she deteriorated again, the decision to intervene surgically was made. Heidi underwent bowel surgery twice before coming home, and her first operation literally short-circuited her bowels and created 2 stomas that sat on the outside of her tummy, which allowed us to feed her as normally as possible and help her keep growing. Heidi lived with her stomas in the NICU for about 8 weeks before her second round of surgery to reconnect her bowel and put everything back together. Along a very long road, we celebrated the small steps and the big ones. Real clothes. These weren't doll's clothes anymore. A real bath, which we didn't get to experience until she was nearly 90 days old, simply because she was never stable enough to get plunged into the water. At 100 days old, we were able to take Heidi outside in the fresh air and find some peace in different surroundings and celebrate getting that tiny little bit closer to home. We celebrated every single gram of weight gain, and I think at about 2 kilos in this photo, I thought she looked like the chubbiest baby alive, given where she'd started. So I always go back to this one because she just looked really fat and rolly to me. And just 9 days after her second round of surgery, we were finally able to bring her home. Heidi spent a total of 127 days in neonatal care, and the vast majority of that time was in intensive care. Much of it was filled with stress, uncertainty and fear, coupled with the sheer exhaustion of maintaining the basics of life alongside NICU. And we had our son at home to look after as well and consider his needs. And on our best days, we were strong, capable and intelligent advocates for our daughter, doing everything we could to participate in her care and assist the team that were looking after her. And in our most vulnerable moments, we left our daughter in the hands of surgeons, doctors and nurses, while we attempted to pick ourselves up off the floor and try and just put one foot in front of the other. So some of you might have seen this today. Heidi's now 3.5 and a thriving, healthy toddler, largely. However, the time from her initial discharge has not been easy by any stretch of the imagination. Her first winter at home was plagued with multiple admissions into hospital for viral illness and pneumonia, and at 2 years of age she needed additional surgery for a bowel obstruction that was a remnant from her initial operations and subsequent scar tissue. So the last 3 years for us as a family have been characterised by countless hospital appointments for important follow-up, so absolutely warranted, numerous admissions both at Flinders and at the Women's and Children's, and suffice to say we know our GP clinic very, very well. As part of Heidi's neonatal follow-up, she's been monitored closely with regards to her growth, meeting her early milestones as a baby, physical and neurological development into childhood, and a range of other measures to ensure that any short-term or long-term complications related to her prematurity are picked up. And so far she's moved through all of her developmental checks with flying colours. And other than being very small for her age in comparison to another 3-year-old, you probably wouldn't pick what she's been through. And as parents, our experience in Heidi's journey from preterm beginnings to home will never ever leave us. The trauma of that time is still very real, and I often find myself recollecting particular days that certain things happened, reading the journal that I wrote for her, or sifting through the photos that remind us of what she went through. As a parent, I'm also acutely aware of the decisions that I made on my daughter's behalf and the subsequent path that she had to travel to make it home. The enormity of what Heidi had to endure to come home to us cuts more deeply than anything. However, I'm driven to do something constructive and purposeful with the raw ends that still remain quite unresolved for me as a mother. So my honours research with the Institute relates to the use of antenatal corticosteroids for women at risk of preterm birth, which is a well-established therapy that we know improves outcomes for babies born too soon. But in particular, my research is examining the current translation of research evidence into clinical practice. So what do we know about what's happening on the ground and the uptake of the evidence that's out there? The debate surrounding the ideal use and dose of corticosteroids is ongoing, and new evidence continues to contribute new information for clinicians who are responsible for providing care to preterm infants, and ultimately their families, like Heidi, and families like mine. And like many stories about the development of new interventions and therapies in clinical care, the translation journey for corticosteroids as an important therapy for women at risk of preterm birth began in the late 1960s, with the first human trials occurring in the 1970s. Subsequent trials and the process of systematic review have confirmed important benefits for babies born too soon. Much of the caution around corticosteroids relates to the potential long-term effects that are yet to be clearly defined. And as I go about my reading and reviewing of literature, I often find myself reflecting on many of the discussions that we had as parents with the clinical team that cared for our daughter and ultimately saved her life. The long journey from scientific discovery in the laboratory through clinical trials in human settings and the gathering of evidence is important to ensure that clinicians and consumers have ready access to high-quality evidence. The additional step of clinicians discussing treatment options and the care for babies born too soon with parents that are clearly under significant stress is a whole nother layer to that journey altogether. And while I'm no expert in neonatal care, what I do know is that possibly the most unsettling thing about the journey with a preterm infant is that nothing is certain. The lines are blurred. There's no black and white, it's generally all grey. You leave your baby each night aiming to get through just a few hours without a call from the hospital to tell you that something's deteriorated, changed, getting worse. And the only thing you can assume safely is that things are likely to keep on changing, often in good ways and sometimes in bad. As parents, we always knew and are still very aware of the likelihood that Heidi will face challenges into childhood. But if you take yourself back to the heat of a NICU environment with a critically ill baby, parents are rarely thinking long term. It's day by day, sometimes hour by hour. And decisions are made with the long-term risks associated with treatment, often put away to simply be dealt with later because there's no space to do that right now. Decisions about treatments that can afford significant short-term gains, but possible long-term consequences are not easy. And generally, there's usually a trade-off somewhere. So as I go about my research and reflect on my own experience, it brings a sense of perspective and satisfaction that somehow I might be able to contribute in a small way to an area of research that has affected our family so profoundly. The care that Heidi received has been defined by the research before our time to refine neonatal care and improve outcomes for babies born too soon. On a global scale, 1 in 10 babies are born preterm, and as we lead up to World Prematurity Day on the 17th of November, the uniting of numerous organisations worldwide to highlight the importance of this cause is inspiring. The aims in the work of the Institute contribute to the global body of knowledge and groundswell of support, and the important work being undertaken here to unravel the mystery behind preterm birth does create hope that someday we will be able to better prevent meeting our babies too soon, as well as continue to improve outcomes for those little determined babies like Heidi that need a lot of care and assistance to come home alive. As a student and a parent, I'm driven by the desire to know more about the mechanisms behind preterm birth and how we can prevent it in order to save another family from the stress and trauma of the journey that we walked. I'm driven to ensure that babies are able to receive the best possible care and in the least invasive and less traumatic ways, because what we watched Heidi endure pushed us to our absolute limits. I'm driven to prevent another mum from grieving the loss of a pregnancy that ended too early, for I know all too well the sadness that brings. And while the road to bring Heidi home was exceptionally difficult, we are very fortunate that we've had a very, very positive outcome, which I know is not always the case for many families. So I thank you for listening, for your attention and your time tonight, and I look forward to the rest of the speakers.